The first thing I heard wasn't the sound of "Happy Birthday." It was the sound of my boyfriend lying. I was standing in the kitchen of our small Brooklyn apartment, lighting candles on the cake I'd baked myself, when Mason's phone buzzed on the counter. I shouldn't have looked. I really shouldn't. But the name that flashed across the screen, Liam Redheart, made my chest tighten like a fist. Liam. His ex. The one who'd broken him once. The one Mason swore he was completely over. The text glowed cruelly in the dim light. "Can we talk? I'm at the old cafe. Just tonight. Please." And Mason had already replied, "I'll be there." For a moment, everything went silent. The candles flickered. The chocolate cake smelled too sweet. And my reflection in the window looked like someone else, someone naive enough to believe forever meant something. When the front door closed a few minutes later, I didn't stop him. I didn't even ask where he was going. I just stared at the flickering candles until the wax melted into the frosting like tears I refused to shed. Mason Carter, 34, respected surgeon at St. John's Hospital. My boyfriend of 3 years, the man who once swore that I was his peace after chaos, was now sitting somewhere across the city with the man who destroyed him. And me? I was turning 27, blowing out candles alone. Maybe that's what love becomes when it outgrows the truth. Polite silence and practiced smiles. When he came home past midnight, I was awake, curled up on the couch with the cake untouched. His coat was damp, his hair messy. The smell of coffee clung to him. He looked startled to see me still there. "Evan," he said softly, voice breaking like a guilty whisper. "I didn't think you'd still be up." "Apparently, I didn't think much either," I said, standing. "How was the cafe?" He froze. His eyes widened, then softened, then looked anywhere but at me. "It wasn't what you think. It never is." I cut in, my voice shaking. "But you still went. On my birthday." That was the night something inside me began to crumble. Not loud, not violent, just a quiet collapse of faith. The next morning I woke up early. I folded my clothes, packed my things, and placed the small apartment key on the counter beside the untouched cake. The world outside was painted gray by drizzle, like the city was mourning something it didn't understand. As I zipped the last suitcase, I heard Mason's voice behind me. "Evan, please, don't do this." He sounded desperate, and that hurt more than I expected because I knew he wasn't desperate for me, but for the version of us that no longer existed. I turned around slowly. "You met him. You chose to meet him, Mason. You made your choice." "It wasn't a choice," he shouted, then lowered his voice, as if afraid of his own volume. "He's sick. He's dying. He called me because he didn't have anyone else." That stopped me. My hands trembled on the suitcase handle. "Sick," I whispered. "And you didn't tell me?" "I didn't want to ruin your birthday," he said. I laughed bitterly. "Congratulations. You did anyway." He stepped closer, rain dripping from his hair. His eyes, those soft, gray eyes that once made me feel safe, were wet with something that wasn't just rain. "Evan, I love you. I swear I do." But I couldn't ignore him. "Not when he's the man who broke you," I snapped. "Or the man who still owns a piece of you." Silence. Heavy. Honest. That's when I knew I couldn't stay. I left that afternoon. The sky was heavy, clouds swollen with rain. Mason followed me to the taxi, standing barefoot on the curb like a man too stunned to move. He didn't beg. He didn't grab me. He just whispered, "Come back when you can believe me again." But I didn't look back. Couldn't. For the next few days, I stayed in a cheap motel near the Hudson River. The wallpaper peeled. The air smelled like cigarette smoke and sadness. I tried to write again, something, anything, but every sentence ended with his name. "Mason," he called. He texted. He even came to my workplace once, standing by the cafe counter in his hospital scrubs, exhaustion written all over his face. I avoided him, pretending not to see, pretending I wasn't dying inside every time he smiled at a stranger. By the end of the week, I decided to leave the city. Maybe go back to my mother's place in Oregon. I needed distance, silence, anything but this half-love that kept me anchored in pain. I booked a flight for Sunday morning. Saturday night, I took one last walk through Brooklyn. The air was cold, the lights soft. I stopped by the bridge where Mason and I had our first kiss, where he'd whispered, "You make me want to be better." I laughed to myself. Guess we both failed that test. When I came back to the motel, the hallway lights were flickering. I turned the corner and froze. Police cars. Outside my door. My heart stopped. 2 officers stood there, talking to the motel manager. And beside them, drenched from the rain, stood Mason. "Evan," he said when he saw me, relief flooding his face. "Thank God. What the hell are you doing here?" I whispered, my voice cracking. He ran a hand through his wet hair, trembling. "You weren't answering your phone. Your coworker said you left early." "Tu thought something happened. With the police, Mason? Are you out of your mind?" He exhaled shakily. "You disappeared. I didn't know where you were. I couldn't lose you like that." The officers exchanged awkward looks, then stepped away, sensing the tension. The manager muttered something and left us alone in the hallway. The silence that followed was unbearable. Mason looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as his boyfriend, not as his mistake, but as the person he was terrified to lose. I wanted to stay angry. God, I did. But the way his hands shook, the way his lips parted like he was afraid to breathe it, broke something in me. "Mason," I whispered, "you can't fix what you broke by calling the cops." He smiled faintly, tears mixing with rain. "Maybe, but I had to make sure you were safe." That was the problem with Mason. He always wanted to save people even when all they wanted was space. He followed me inside. I didn't stop him. The room was small, messy. My suitcase half-packed again. He looked around, eyes dimming. "This place isn't you," he said quietly. "You hate motel carpets." I almost laughed. "I hate a lot of things lately." He stepped closer, cautious. "Then hate me if you have to, but don't disappear." "Mason, please," he said, voice breaking. "Don't leave like this. Not when there's so much I haven't said." I looked at him, really looked. The tired eyes, the trembling hands, the kind of exhaustion that only comes from loving too much and too wrong. And for the first time I saw it, fear. The kind that hides behind strength. When he told me Liam had died that morning, everything stopped. The room tilted. My pulse roared in my ears. "He called me from the hospice 2 weeks ago," Mason said softly. "He wanted to say goodbye. I couldn't bring myself to tell you. I thought if I could help him, maybe I'd finally let go." Tears slipped down his face. But I didn't. I never let go of anything. Not even the pain. I didn't move. Couldn't. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Mason's voice trembled. "I didn't cheat on you, Evan. I swear. But maybe I did something worse. I tried to be someone's savior again when I was still trying to save myself." For the first time, I didn't feel angry. Just tired. So tired. I sat down on the edge of the bed, and Mason knelt in front of me, his forehead resting against my knee like a man confessing to his last sin. "Tell me how to fix this," he whispered. I didn't answer. I just placed a trembling hand on his head and said, "You can't fix what grief breaks. You can only choose what's worth holding on to after." And that night, for the first time since my birthday, I let myself cry. Not because of betrayal or loss or fear, but because despite everything, part of me still wanted to believe in him. In us. And when he held me, silently, in that tiny motel room as rain whispered against the glass, I realized something I'd forgotten along the way. Love doesn't always arrive clean and shining. Sometimes it crawls back, soaked and broken but still breathing. The rain didn't stop that night. It just softened into a steady whisper against the window, like the city itself was trying not to intrude. Mason didn't move from where he knelt. His head rested against my knee, breath shallow and unsteady, as if every inhale carried the weight of his guilt. I didn't know what to say. Every word felt too small for the storm between us. Finally, I whispered, "You should sleep." He shook his head. "Not until you tell me you're staying." "I can't tell you that," I said, voice low. "Not yet." He lifted his gaze. His eyes were red, bloodshot, but there was something painfully honest in them, something I hadn't seen in months. Then let me earn it back, he murmured. Even if it takes the rest of my life. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe in the version of us that existed before the lies, before the distance. But belief doesn't come easy when your heart's still learning how to trust again. I turned away. You can't just fix this, Mason. You can't treat it like another patient. I know, he said softly, but I can learn how to love better. We didn't talk after that. He slept on the floor, wrapped in his coat, while I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling until the first light of dawn crept through the blinds. At some point, I must have drifted off, because I woke to the sound of Mason on the phone. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Yes, I'll be there by 8. No, I'm fine, he said. Then a pause. Yeah, he's safe. He turned when he saw me awake, guilt flickering across his features. Morning, he said, like it was just any other day. Work? I asked. He nodded. Emergency surgery. A car crash last night. Go, I said. He hesitated, walking toward me. Evan, I'll still be here, I interrupted. Just go do your job. It was the first time in weeks I'd said something that wasn't made of anger or exhaustion. And the way his shoulders relaxed, just a little, made my chest ache. Before he left, he bent down, his lips brushing my forehead like a question. I'll come back, he whispered, and then he was gone. The silence after he left was almost peaceful. I made coffee in the motel's chipped mug and sat by the window, watching the rain lift. The city was waking up, sirens, cars, distant voices. Life kept going, even when your heart didn't know how. I thought about leaving again, about the flight to Oregon that I hadn't canceled. But something about Mason's face last night, raw, broken, real, kept me here. Maybe closure wasn't about walking away. Maybe it was about staying long enough to see if love could still breathe under all the damage. By afternoon, I went back to our apartment. It felt smaller than I remembered, quieter. The faint scent of Mason's cologne lingered in the hallway. On the table sat the cake from my birthday, still there, still untouched. The candles had melted into twisted shapes, frozen in time. Next to it was something new, a small envelope with my name written in his careful handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. Evan, I don't expect you to forgive me. Not yet. But I need you to know what really happened. Liam didn't call me to rekindle anything. He called because he was scared of dying alone. I thought I could be strong enough to help him without hurting you. I was wrong. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to burden you with my past. But love isn't about hiding the pain, it's about sharing it. If you decide to go, I'll understand. But if you stay, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt where my heart belongs again. Mason, the paper blurred as tears filled my eyes. For the first time, his words didn't feel like excuses. They felt like truth. That night, I didn't leave. Instead, I cleaned the apartment, washed the dishes, folded the blankets, even threw out the melted candles. It wasn't about pretending everything was finite, it was about reclaiming the space we'd both abandoned. When Mason came home past midnight, he froze at the doorway. His scrubs were stained, his eyes heavy from exhaustion. But when he saw me sitting on the couch, waiting, something in him broke open. You're here, he said, voice trembling. You stayed. I nodded, barely whispering. I read your letter. He swallowed hard, setting down his bag. I meant every word. I know, I said quietly. And I believe you. That simple truth seemed to undo him. He crossed the room in 2 steps, kneeling in front of me the same way he had the night before, but this time, not in guilt. In gratitude, I touched his face, feeling the warmth beneath the weariness. You can stop apologizing now, I murmured. We're both still learning. He laughed weakly, eyes wet. God, I don't deserve you. Maybe not, I said, smiling softly. But you've got me anyway. We didn't kiss right away. We just sat there, holding each other in the dim light, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft rhythm of our breathing. It wasn't passion that filled the room, it was something gentler, something steadier. Healing. For the first time in months, It felt like we were finally speaking the same language again. Days passed. Mason went back to work, throwing himself into surgery schedules and late-night shifts. I started taking freelance photography gigs again, something I'd given up when things got heavy between us. We didn't talk about Liam. We didn't talk about the night he left. But we didn't have to. The silence between us wasn't cold Anna-Marie, it was understanding. One evening, Mason came home early, a rare thing. He found me on the balcony, camera in hand, capturing the sunset bleeding into the skyline. He leaned against the doorframe, watching quietly. "What are you shooting?" he asked. "Us," I said. "What we almost lost." He smiled, stepping closer. "Can I be in the frame this time?" I turned the camera toward him. "You always were." That night, we cooked dinner together for the first time since everything fell apart. Nothing fancy, just pasta, wine, and laughter that came easier than I expected. Mason told me stories from the hospital, about a little girl who insisted her teddy bear needed heart surgery, and I laughed until my chest hurt. Then, when the dishes were done and the city had gone quiet, he took my hand. "Evan," he said softly, "can I show you something?" He led me into the bedroom, where on the nightstand sat a small wooden box I hadn't seen before. Inside was a Necklacia thin silver chain with a tiny charm shaped like a heartbeat line. "I was going to give this to you on your birthday," he said. "But then, everything happened." I picked it up, the metal cool against my skin. "Mason, you didn't have to." "I know," he interrupted, voice steady now. "But I wanted to, because even when everything went wrong, you were still my reason to come home." I looked at him, tears stinging my eyes again. "You're such a romantic idiot." He smiled. "Only for you." Later, when we finally lay in bed together, the silence between us was different. No tension, no fear, just the quiet rhythm of our hearts sinking again. His hand found mine under the sheets, warm and sure. "Evan," he whispered into the dark, "do you ever think love is just a series of people finding new ways to forgive each other?" I thought about it, about every fight, every scar, every moment we chose to stay instead of run. "Maybe," I said softly, "but I think it's also about learning how to stay when it's easier to leave." He kissed the back of my hand, and for the first time, I believed that maybe we could make it. The next morning, he had an early shift. I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of his keys. He leaned down, brushing his lips against my temple. "I'll be home early tonight," he murmured. "Be safe," I said sleepily. He smiled. "Always." But that day, he didn't come home early. He didn't come home at all. It happened just after 5 p.m. A pileup on the I-278. An overturned truck, multiple casualties. The hospital called all available surgeons in for emergency response. When I saw the news alert, my chest went cold. I called him. Once, twice. No answer. Hours later, the call finally came, but it wasn't him. It was Dr. Allen, his colleague. "Evan," he said gently, "Mason's fine, but he's been in surgery for 10 hours straight." He refused to leave the OR. Relief and worry tangled in my stomach. "He's always like that," I whispered. "He saved 3 lives today," Allen said. "But he's running on nothing. You should come get him before he collapses." When I reached the hospital, I found Mason sitting alone in the staff lounge, still in his scrubs, hands trembling from exhaustion. His eyes were empty, staring at the floor. I knelt beside him, just like he had for me that night. "Hey," I whispered. "You did enough. Come home." He blinked, as if waking from a dream. "They were so young," he murmured. I couldn't stop. I placed a hand on his cheek. "You can't save everyone, Mason." He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time in months, I saw peace in his eyes. "But I saved enough to come back to you." I smiled through tears. "Then let's go home." That night, he fell asleep with his head on my chest, the rise and fall of his breath steady against me. I stroked his hair, whispering into the dark, "Happy late birthday, Evan. You made it." Because maybe that was the real gift, learning that love wasn't about perfect days or unbroken promises. It was about showing up, even when everything fell apart. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the morning. The morning after Mason's 10-hour surgery, the apartment was filled with silence, except for the sound of him breathing softly beside me. He hadn't moved all night. I lay there for a long time, just watching him, memorizing the rise and fall of his chest, the small lines near his eyes that deepened when he was tired. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't afraid to look at him. He stirred eventually, blinking against the sunlight. "You're staring," he murmured, his voice still rough from exhaustion. "Get used to it," I said quietly. "I missed the view." He chuckled, the sound hoarse but real. "God, I don't remember the last time I slept that deep. Probably before you decided to perform back-to-back miracles," I teased. "Hey, they needed me," he said, but then his smile softened. "And I needed you." I didn't answer right away. I just reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You found me," I whispered, "even when I didn't want to be found." His eyes darkened with emotion. "I'll always find you, Evan. Even if I have to cross every street in New York to do it." The days that followed felt almost fragile, like we were living inside a second chance that could shatter if we weren't careful. Mason went back to work, though he tried to come home earlier. I picked up my camera again, shooting portraits, city streets, small moments that reminded me life kept moving. But one evening, as I was editing photos in the living room, Mason came home with something in his hand, a folded letter and a small box. He looked hesitant, almost nervous. "I went to Liam's hospice today," he said, "to deliver his things to his sister. She gave me this." He handed me the box. Inside was a Polaroid, an old one, edges yellowing. It was of Mason and Liam, both laughing, sunlight spilling through a hospital window. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "If he loves you half as much as he loved me, then you'll never be alone. Don't let him hide from the world again." I stared at it for a long time, feeling something shift inside me. Liam wasn't a ghost haunting us anymore. He was a reminder of who Mason used to be, of what he'd lost, and of how far we'd both come. Mason's voice was barely above a whisper. "He asked her to give that to me, said it might help me stop running." I looked up at him. "Did it?" He nodded. "Yeah, but only because I have you." That night I took him to the rooftop. It was something I used to do when I felt trapped, watch the city lights and remember that the world was still bigger than my pain. Mason had never been up there with me before. The air was cool, the skyline glowing gold and blue. He leaned against the railing beside me, our shoulders touching. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "Yeah," I whispered. "It always is, if you stay long enough to see the sunrise." He turned to me, eyes glimmering in the city light. "You really believe that?" "I do now." He smiled faintly. "You make me want to believe in things again." The wind picked up, brushing his hair into his eyes. Without thinking, I reached out and fixed it. My fingers lingered against his skin, tracing the warmth there. And when our eyes met, it felt like the whole world had gone quiet. "Evan," he whispered, "thank you for staying." I smiled. "Thank you for coming back." Then he kissed me slow, steady, unhurried. The kind of kiss that doesn't burn, but heals. The kind that says we made it. And when he pulled back, I realized that for the first time, my heart wasn't trembling from fear. It was trembling from peace. Weeks turned into months. The rhythm of our lives found balance again. I started exhibiting my photography at a local gallery, something I'd always dreamed of but never had the courage to do. Mason surprised me on opening night, showing up in his white shirt and blazer, a bouquet of wildflowers in hand. "You look beautiful," he said, eyes glinting with pride. I laughed. "You're saying that because you're surrounded by photos of yourself." He grinned. "Not true. I'm surrounded by photos of the man I love." He wasn't lying. I'd captured him in a dozen candid moments, reading in bed, laughing over coffee, standing in the rain outside the hospital. But my favorite photo wasn't of him at all. It was of two silhouettes on a rooftop, side by side, framed by the dawn. Mason noticed it too. "That's us," he said softly. It's hope, I replied. Later that night, after the gallery closed, we walked home through the quiet streets. He slipped his hand into mine, and I realized how natural it felt again, how easy it was to breathe beside him. You ever think about the day we met? He asked suddenly. All the time, I said, smiling. You spilled coffee all over my notebook. You called me an idiot. You were an idiot, I teased. He laughed. And you still fell for me. I guess I like fixing broken things, I said. He stopped walking, turning to face me under the streetlight. Then it's a good thing I broke in the right direction. Time didn't erase what happened. We still had scars, small ones, invisible to anyone else but us. Sometimes, when Mason's phone rang late at night, I still felt a flicker of fear. Sometimes he still hesitated before leaving for work, like he was afraid I'd disappear again. But we learned to talk, to tell the truth even when it hurt, because love isn't built on the absence of pain. It's built on the decision to stay again and again. One night, about a year later, Mason surprised me with something Newa trip. Just pack a bag, he said, grinning like a kid. I'm taking you somewhere. We drove for hours, past the city, through winding roads and soft hills, until the lights of New York disappeared behind us. When we finally stopped, the sky was clear, filled with stars. Where are we? I asked. He pointed ahead. Liam's old cabin. His sister wanted me to have it. I thought, maybe it's time we make new memories here. The cabin was small, surrounded by pines and the quiet hum of summer. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and rain. I walked around slowly, touching the wooden walls, the dust-covered furniture, the old books on the shelf. Everything felt like a memory waiting to breathe again. Mason came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. It's peaceful here, he said. Yeah, I murmured. Feels like forgiveness. We spent the weekend there, cooking, walking by the lake, lying under the stars. It was simple, easy, like the world had finally stopped demanding explanations from us. On our last night, as we sat by the fire, Mason handed me something, small, a ring. Nothing fancy, just silver, engraved with a single heartbeat line. I was going to wait, he said softly. But honestly, I don't want to anymore. I froze, the world going quiet around us. Mason, I'm not asking for forever, he said. I'm just asking for now. For every sunrise, every fight, every moment we almost give up but don't. I want to keep choosing you. Tears blurred my vision. You idiot, I whispered, laughing through the ache. You had to say that here, of all places? He smiled, his eyes wet. I wanted the ghosts to hear it too. I took the ring from his trembling hand, my own shaking as I slid it on. Then let them, I said, because I'm not leaving again. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tight against his chest as the fire crackled beside us. The night air smelled of pine and ash and something new, something alive. And when he kissed me, it wasn't just love. It was everything we'd survived to get here. Years later, when people asked how we met, I always smiled and said, in a hospital cafeteria, over a spilled cup of coffee. But the truth? We met 100 times after that. Every time he found me when I was lost. Every time I forgave him when he broke. Every time we chose to begin again instead of walking away. That's what love really isn't, the first meeting, but every meeting after. Now, every morning, before he leaves for work, Mason still kisses my forehead and whispers, "Be safe." And every night, I wait for him on the balcony, camera ready, capturing the light that finds him even after the hardest days. We still fight sometimes. We still fall silent sometimes. But now, silence doesn't mean the end, it just means we're catching our breath. Because we've learned that hearts don't stay unbroken. They heal piece by piece in the hands of those who choose to keep holding on. And on the anniversary of that first, terrible birthday, the one that almost ended us, we didn't buy gifts or throw a party. We just went to the rooftop again, watching the city wake beneath us. Mason slipped his hand into mine and whispered, "Happy birthday, Evan." I smiled, eyes on the horizon. It is now. The sun rose then, soft and golden, spilling across our faces like forgiveness. The wind carried the city's heartbeat to us, the sirens, the traffic, the laughter, life. And for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what love meant. It meant this: the rain, the pain, the coming back, the staying, always the staying. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.